Next up, we have Angela Peoples. Angela Peoples is an organizer, activist, advocate, working toward the liberation of all Black people, a graduate of Western Michigan University, where she studied political science and Africana studies, fighting to stop an anti-affirmative action ballot initiative, and continued on building student power and fighting for college access and affordability within the United States Students Association. She also, in the last 3 years, has been working to improve consumer protection laws for student loan borrowers and young consumers at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Angela currently serves as the co-director of Get Equal, a national grassroots network of LGBTQ people and allies fighting for LGBTQ liberation. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for having me, and I'm most grateful to be here to be able to hear the testimony and the words of so many brave activists, leaders, victims, survivors, and folks who are committed to moving us, all of us, on a different path forward. So today, as I was thinking about what the context of this conversation, I was really moved by not just thinking about the cost of the decades-long wars in Iraq, but actually the investments that were made in order to sustain such a monstrosity. In the last 2 decades, in order to sustain such a war, they've required investments in institutions and not in our identities. It's required investments in military terror and dominance. It's required investments in building power on top of people, not with them and for them. And those investments have spilled over into effects that I know necessarily weren't intended, but I don't think as we talk about the context of wars, we talk about the context of war crimes, that spillover I think is much more massive than we can even name. So those investments in military power and force have spilled over into our streets, into our schools, into our celebrations of pride, where we see military equipment, tanks, assault rifles in our airports, all in the name of protection and maintaining safety, but really is a spillover effect of the investments in military power and force. We see the investments in institutions instead of our identities that is manifested in folks clinging to political parties and ideals that are not in conjunction with who they are and how they want to live their lives. We see people continuing, as these parties and these ideals continue to invest in profits and not in the stability and the sustainability of us as humans. We invested in militarizing our own people, our other human beings. We turn them into soldiers and then send them home to our neighborhoods and to our schools and to our churches without the proper care and treatment to re-enter our society. Instead, we've given them guns and badges and told them to protect our schools and to serve us and to keep us safe. We have there are LGBTQ people, there are queer and trans people on the front lines across the globe that are fighting for their lives. My organization, we're a grassroots network of LGBTQ folks and allies, and our mission has always been to build a grassroots movement for life beyond, or for full equality. And today we fight for beyond equality because we recognize that there is a movement to make many of us feel like we can have access to a status quo that was never meant to serve us. And so even as we fight for equality and an investment in that ideal, we learn and we know that our equality is our life and our livelihood is not tied to the laws. It's not tied to a particular identity that was never meant for us. And so as we fight for liberation and queer and trans folks across the country fight for their lives, we are fighting to live freely, to live our most liberated lives on a day-to-day. And for many of us, that looks different, from hour to hour, from day to day, from month to month. As the forces of neoliberalism and patriarchy and transphobia and homophobia threaten us and come up with new ways to threaten us as we fight back on all fronts. Well, one thing that does unite us is the need to divest from all of the aspects of our world and from our values of violence, of occupation that have sustained these powerful institutions for many years. We must, all of us across our spectrums, must divest from these ideals, whether it's in our hearts, in our schools, in our campaigns, in our organizations, and across our communities. The investment in the fear and in skepticism allows us to otherize each other, and it has allowed us, and I say us, I mean folks who are complicit here in the U.S., who have been complicit in these actions. We co-sign on the mass murder and the genocide of folks around the country and in our communities here today. And now we see that investment in we see the investment in fear and skepticism and hate. That investment has compounded, and it is returning to us with interest to the White House. And as we add up those costs, as we take stock today, the cost of this war, we must also look at the investments. We must have an honest assessment of the values and the ideals that we as a people have invested in that brought us to the violence and the fear and the really brink where we are today as a country and as a world. This idea of, sort of the populist movements that are rising in countries across the country, not just the U.S. We're seeing this first, not even just first, but one of the most visible examples is the vote in Great Britain to exit to exit the EU. Excuse me. We see this growth is not just a rise in hate, but also a response to the progress that we made, our ability to organize, to build, to dismantle, and to divest from these harmful ideals, these harmful identities and institutions that have plagued us for so long. We see this rise in folks voting for hate, voting for fear, investing in that as a response to our power. And so I would say that doing the work to continue to divest and dismantle inside is necessary to not just change course, but to uproot the pillars of neoliberalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, anti-Blackness that exist inside our walls and inside all of our hearts. Thank you.